My parents have always favored my younger sister since childhood. At her most desperate moment, Hayden, her father's friend despite their age difference, appeared in her life. He was 8 years her senior, a top tycoon feared by all as the living king of hell. Ruthless in his methods, cold-blooded and unfeeling, yet he held only her in the palm of his hand, spoiling her beyond all bounds. She said she liked ginkgo trees, so he bought an entire street and planted it full of them. She mentioned craving the fermented rice balls from the north side of town, and at 3 a.m., he drove to get them and presented them to her. When she had menstrual cramps, he flew back overnight, enduring over 10 hours on a plane, just to hold her and comfort her the entire night. Every woman wanted to marry him, but his eyes were only for her. On their wedding day, he knelt on one knee to put on her shoes, making socialites green with envy. After marriage, he doted on her even more. When she had morning sickness, he cancelled an international meeting to stay with her. When her legs cramped at midnight, he woke up immediately to massage them. When she was 7 months pregnant, she returned to the old family estate for a banquet. Suddenly, a fire broke out, with thick smoke billowing. The always biased parents shielded Natalie on either side as they rushed out, leaving her knocked to the ground, her abdomen slamming hard against the corner of a table. In her dying moments, a figure broke through the flames. Hayden picked her up with bloodied hands. "Don't be afraid, Nancy. I'm here." Tears fell in his arms, and at that moment, she finally knew for certain that she was deeply loved. She didn't wake up until 3 days later in the hospital, stumbling around with an 4-pole in search of him. Just as she reached the hallway, she heard a chilling conversation inside. "Who told you to set the fire without permission?" Hayden's voice was like ice. "It's only been 7 months, and you're already in such a hurry to drug her and cut the baby out. Do you want to kill her and the child?" Her parents' voices were timid. "We had no choice. Natalie's leukemia is getting worse, and we urgently need the baby's bone marrow. We can't wait any longer. I want to save Natalie more than any of you." His low, suppressed tone froze the blood in her veins. "Otherwise, why would I go to such lengths to get close to Nancy and make her pregnant?" Nancy's world came crashing down. "You are not to take any further action," he said deliberately. "I have my own plans." The parents nodded repeatedly. "Yes, yes, we were too hasty." Nancy staggered out of the hallway, her legs weak and barely able to support her. She leaned against the cold wall, tears silently streaming down her face. It turned out that Hayden married her, doted on her, and got her pregnant, all just to use her child to save his beloved Natalie. Turns out, he also had feelings for Natalie. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. She clutched the 4-stand so tightly that her nails dug deep into her palms, yet she felt no pain. Uncontrollably, fragments of the past flashed through her mind. Her mother nearly lost her life during childbirth due to complications, which made her resent the daughter from an early age. Her father, notoriously devoted to his wife, shared this aversion and showered all his affection exclusively on Natalie. Natalie celebrated her birthday with her parents renting out the entire amusement park. While on her birthday, she didn't even get a piece of cake. Natalie fell ill, and her parents stayed up all night by her side, while she, burning with a 40-degree fever, could only curl up alone under the covers and endure. She thought no one would ever love her in this lifetime, until that day. She went to Elton's Husito to attend a banquet. Natalie deliberately pushed her into the pool, mocking her as a pitiful creature no one wanted. Drenched and humiliated, she was surrounded by laughter. Just when she was at her most desperate, Hayden descended like a god, taking off his suit jacket to drape over her shoulders, casting a cold glance at the crowd. "Anyone else wants to laugh? Try me." At that moment, she fell in love with him at first sight, never expected that Hayden also liked her, pursuing her fiercely and spoiling her rotten after marriage. Yet every night, he would take her relentlessly, refusing to stop even when she begged through tears. She thought he was her salvation, but in reality, what he truly loved was Natalie. 3 years ago, Natalie was diagnosed with leukemia. Her parents immediately got tested for a match and even had her tested as well, but none were compatible. She distinctly remembered hearing the doctor say, "The only option now is for Miss to have a child and see if the baby's bone marrow is a match." So, was this Hayden's true motive for approaching and pursuing her? For Natalie's sake, he was even willing to sacrifice himself. Was his love also a lie? Heartbroken, she staggered back, only to hear Natalie on a phone call outside her hospital room. "Don't worry, my leukemia is fake," Natalie said with a smug laugh. "I just wanted to watch Nancy sink deeper into despair, and Hayden. He thinks it was me who made him fall in love at first sight all those years ago. That's why he's so good to me. But he has no idea the person playing the violin in the garden that day was actually Nancy. I won't let her take Hayden away from me, never. Nancy stood frozen in place, her blood seeming to turn to ice. So it turned out, Hayden had loved the wrong person all along. His heart and eyes were completely filled with Natalie. Yet he never realized the one who truly made his heart race was her, and she, because of this misplaced love, was utterly exploited. Nancy numbly raised her hand, only to realize she had recorded the entire video. She didn't know how she made it back to the doctor's office. I want an abortion. Her voice was hoarse, yet unusually resolute. The doctor looked at her in shock. Miss Nancy, the baby is already 7 months old. Are you sure you don't want it? I'm sure. She spoke word by word, as if carving out her own heart. The doctor hesitated. But Mr. Hayden has made it clear that this child is very important. We dare not perform the surgery without authorization. If you insist, this consent form must be signed by Mr. Hayden. Nancy closed her eyes briefly, picked up the consent form, and turned to leave. As soon as I pushed the door open, I bumped into Hayden, who was rushing over, dressed in a tailored suit. His features remained as strikingly handsome as a deity's, yet now carried unmistakable urgency. The moment he saw her, his furrowed brow relaxed, and he strode forward to pull her into his embrace. Where have you been, sweetheart? His palm pressed against the nape of her neck as his voice dropped to a husky murmur. Were you trying to worry me to death? The crisp scent of cedarwood enveloped her. A warmth that once brought her comfort now felt like a knife's edge. She looked up at him and asked softly, were you really afraid something might happen to me? Hayden furrowed his brows slightly, his thumb gently caressing her cheek. Of course. Everyone in City H knows you're my life. And now you're carrying our child, the child. Nancy felt her heart constrict violently, the pain so intense she could barely stand. She lowered her eyes to conceal her emotions and handed over the surgical consent form. I'm planning to get some tests done. I need your signature. Hayden took the document, pausing as his gaze swept across the paper. What kind of tests? Instinctively, she covered the lower half of the page with her hand. Her voice as light as falling snow. Just routine, 3rd trimester screening. He frowned slightly, about to take a closer look, when his phone suddenly vibrated. Natalie's text popped up. Brother-in-law, I feel terrible. Hayden's expression changed abruptly. Without another glance, he hastily signed the document and shoved it back into her hand. Nancy, something urgent came up. He cupped her face and planted a kiss. Go ahead with the checkup on your own. Once I'm done, I'll stay with you and the baby the whole time. Before the words had fully left his mouth, he had already turned and walked away, his figure disappearing around the corner of the hallway. Nancy stood in place, staring at the flamboyant signature on the consent form, her tears falling onto the bold black characters spelling abortion procedure, blurring the words into a smudged, watery stain. Immersive translate, on the operating table. Cold instruments pierced her body. Because it was an abortion, anesthesia couldn't be administered, and the pain of every inch of flesh being torn away was excruciatingly clear. Nancy clenched her lips until the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, yet memories flooded her mind uncontrollably. Their first meeting, he draped his suit jacket over her shoulders, his gaze icy yet tender. Don't be afraid. On their wedding night, he knelt on one knee to slip her shoes on, his fingers brushing her ankle as he whispered, Nancy, I'll treat you well for the rest of my life. When morning sickness struck, he fed her porridge himself, coaxing like a child. Just one more bite. Immersive translate, it's all fake. The excruciating pain suddenly intensified, and she could no longer hold back a scream, her nails digging deep into her palms. In her daze, she seemed to hear a child's cry. Or perhaps it was just an illusion. Hayden, she silently repeated in her heart, tears mingling with sweat as they fell. The child was gone. We were over. Nancy lay in the hospital for a day. No one came to see her. Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton did not come. Hayden didn't come either. She completed the discharge procedures alone. As she passed by the VIP ward, she caught a glimpse of the scene inside through the half-open door. Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton sat on either side of Natalie's hospital bed, peeling fruit and feeding her water with pained expressions. Meanwhile, Hayden stood nearby, holding medical reports with a slight frown, speaking softly to the doctor. Natalie tugged at his sleeve coquettishly, and he immediately leaned down to gently tuck her in. Nancy stood outside the door, her fingers unconsciously digging into her palms. She remembered when they were children, both she and Natalie had a fever at the same time. Their parents stayed by Natalie's bedside all night but didn't even pour her a glass of water. Later, she got used to it. Later on, she met Hayden. He gave her so much love that she never needed to envy anyone else again, but now, for the first time, she saw Hayden treat Natalie better than he treated her. It turned out, no one truly loved her. Back at the villa, Nancy bought a fake pillow, stuffed it into her clothes, and pretended she was still pregnant. Then, she placed the 8-month-old fetus she had aborted into an exquisite gift box, preserved it in formaldehyde, and gently locked it away in a drawer. This would be her gift to Hayden. After completing all this, she picked up her phone and dialed the number of Qingshin Nunnery. Hello. I wish to become a nun. Her voice was soft, yet remarkably clear. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before a voice slowly responded, Benefactor, to enter our Buddhist order, one must sever all worldly attachments and forsake love for this lifetime. Are you certain of your decision? I am certain. Then please come to the temple in 2 weeks, and we will hold the ordination ceremony for you. Nancy softly uttered an and hung up the phone. Not long after hanging up, footsteps were heard outside the door. Hayden pushed the door open, his brows slightly furrowed. Nancy, why didn't you tell me when you were discharged from the hospital? He approached her, pressing his palm against her abdomen, his voice low. Don't do this again. Understand? How are the test results? Is the baby all right? Nancy hadn't even spoken when Natalie walked in with a beaming smile. Sister, how could you come back without a word? You have no idea how worried brother-in-law was. He almost turned the hospital upside down. Nancy looked up at Hayden. The man immediately explained, Natalie wanted to leave the hospital to recuperate recently. Since the air here is good, we brought her to stay for a few days. Natalie smiled innocently. Sorry for the trouble these days. Her eyes were full of provocation, as if waiting to see Nancy break down, go crazy, or become hysterical. But Nancy just nodded calmly, no trouble at all, for the entire day that followed. Nancy sat on the sofa, watching quietly. She watched as Hayden personally instructed the servants to prepare a guest room for Natalie, meticulously specifying every detail. The mattress must be the softest. Her back is sensitive. She watched him at dinner, remembering Natalie's every dietary restriction. She doesn't eat cilantro, seafood must be shelled, and the soup shouldn't be too hot. She looked at him and suddenly recalled many details she had overlooked at every family gathering. Hayden's gaze would always inadvertently land on Natalie. Every time Natalie was sick, he would coincidentally pass by the hospital. Even after she became pregnant, his occasional absent-mindedness was actually thoughts of Natalie. How could she not have seen it? Nancy gently closed her eyes and said to herself in her heart, Nancy, ah Nancy, you're so ridiculous. Almost, she thought she was loved. She ate without tasting the food, hastily took a few bites, and then returned to her room. Not long after, Hayden pushed the door open and entered. Why did you eat so little today? He sat by the bed, gently stroking her long hair. Are you feeling unwell? She avoided his touch. Not hungry. Hayden gently squeezed her fingertips. Really not hungry. Really not hungry. Then what should I do if I'm hungry? Nancy was about to say, then go out and keep eating. Hayden lowered his head and kissed her collarbone. She froze all over. Why? He slept with her only to save Natalie. Now that she's already pregnant, why does he still desire her so intensely? It was the same before. Just after passing the 3-month danger period, he couldn't wait to have her. Even when she begged tearfully, he would only kiss away her tears and hoarsely say, one last time. Nancy pushed him away. Child, it's fine. Hayden gripped her wrist, his voice hoarse. Use your legs, help me. She had no reason to refuse, yet the embrace she once relied on so deeply now only made her feel suffocated. Just as Hayden was deepening the kiss, a knock sounded at the door. Brother-in-law, sister, are you asleep? Natalie's voice came from outside the door. Hayden paused, the desire in his eyes instantly fading, replaced by clarity. He opened the door. Natalie stood outside with a gentle smile. Sister is quite far along in her pregnancy now, so she must be having trouble moving around, right? I've recently learned some physical therapy techniques and wanted to give her a massage. Nancy looked up at her. No need. Does sister dislike me? Natalie's eyes instantly reddened as she turned to Hayden. Brother-in-law, I just wanted to help. Hayden walked over, his warm hand touching Nancy's face. All right, Natalie means well. Let her help you. Natalie pushed her luck. Brother-in-law, during the therapy, we need to tie up hands and feet to prevent any movement. Hayden nodded and immediately took the ribbon. Nancy watched helplessly as he tied her wrist to the headboard. The sound of the knot tightening like a knife stabbing into her heart. Brother-in-law, thank you for trusting me. Natalie smiled gently, but a hint of triumph flashed in her eyes. You should leave now. The therapy requires quiet. Hayden nodded. his fingertips lightly brushing Nancy's cheek. "Be good and listen to Natalie." With that, he turned and left. The sound of the door closing was soft, yet it struck Nancy like a heavy hammer to the heart. She stared at the tightly shut door, her heart gripped by an invisible hand, the pain so intense she could barely breathe. He didn't even hesitate. Natalie had only to speak, and he obediently walked out. "Sister, relax a little." Natalie leaned in, her fingertips brushing over the bound wrists. "If you stay this tense, the therapy won't be as effective." Nancy glared coldly at her. "I don't want therapy. Get out." Natalie paused mid-motion, the smile gradually fading from her face. She moved closer to Nancy's ear, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know the truth now?" Nancy's fingers trembled slightly, yet her expression remained unreadable. "What truth?" "Stop pretending." Natalie chuckled lightly. "You know Hayden approached you just to get the child's bone marrow." She sighed, her tone laced with pity. "But what can you do even if you know? You can't stop anything. Before, it was you who suffered under me. Once the child is born." Her fingers lightly tapped Nancy's swollen abdomen. "It'll be the child's turn to suffer under me." Nancy clenched her teeth, biting her lip until it bled, the taste of blood spreading in her mouth. "Are you done?" Her voice was hoarse. "If you're done, get out." Natalie suddenly smiled. "I didn't come here to say these things." She turned around and took out a bottle of alcohol from the medical kit. "I really came to give you physical therapy." The next second, the cold liquid poured onto Nancy's back. Before she could react, Natalie had already flicked the lighter to life. The flames roared up instantly, the searing pain engulfing her entire body in an instant. Nancy let out a piercing scream, thrashing desperately, but her wrists were bound tightly, the ribbons cutting into her flesh as the fire grew fiercer. She howled, her body convulsing wildly, the sheets soaked through with sweat. The flames sizzled against her flesh, the pain so intense her vision darkened, nearly causing her to faint. Finally, she yanked her wrist violently, the ribbon snapped, and she rolled off the bed, desperately smothering the fire on her back with the blanket. The fire was out, but her back was already a mangled mess of flesh and blood, each breath feeling like a knife slicing through her. Nancy pushed herself up from the edge of the bed, trembling all over, and took step after step toward Natalie. Natalie suddenly let out a scream and fell to the ground. Brother-in-law, help." The door was flung open. Hayden rushed in. Natalie was in tears, clutching her arm and sobbing. "It's not sister's fault. I hurt her first. That's why she pushed me." Hayden frowned at Nancy, his gaze chillingly cold. "Nancy, how could you do this?" Natalie was just trying to help. Nancy opened her mouth, but the searing pain in her back left her voiceless. She could only clutch the bedsheet tightly, her knuckles turning white. Hayden didn't wait for her explanation. He bent down, picked up Natalie, and turned to leave. He left in such a hurry that he didn't even notice he had bumped into Nancy. She staggered and fell to the ground, her forehead hitting the corner of the table, blood streaming down her cheek. But Hayden didn't even look back. Nancy lay on the ground, watching his figure disappear at the end of the corridor. The wound on her back burned with a searing pain, blood from her forehead dripping onto the floor, yet she felt the deepest ache seemed to come from her heart. She was in such a wretched, agonizing state. Yet he didn't even spare her a glance. In the past, even the slightest scrape would send him into a frenzy of worry. But now, suddenly, she laughed, a laugh that sent tears streaming down her face. "Hayden, you love Natalie so much. If one day you realize you've loved the wrong person, wouldn't it tear your heart apart and fill you with endless regret?" Nancy's back burned with pain as she gritted her teeth, trembling while applying medicine to her wounds. Every touch felt like a knife cutting into her. Yet she didn't shed a single tear. Her tears had long since dried up, just as the medicine was applied. The door was suddenly flung open. Slap. Mrs. Hamilton barged in and slapped her hard across the face. "You wretched creature. Natalie was kind enough to give you physical therapy, and you dared to push her." Nancy was struck so hard by the slap that her head snapped to the side, a trickle of blood seeping from the corner of her mouth. Before she could recover, Mr. Hamilton kicked her in the knee, sending her crashing to the ground in pain, where she curled up in agony. "Drag her to the ancestral hall." Mr. Hamilton commanded coldly. "She must learn her lesson today." The bodyguard immediately stepped forward, roughly grabbing her and dragging her out. Nancy felt her whole body go cold, lacking even the strength to struggle as they hauled her along. When they reached the ancestral hall, she realized the floor was covered with sharp shards of broken glass. "Kneel." Mrs. Hamilton shouted harshly. "Do you know Natalie has leukemia? Her body is so weak, yet she still thought of taking care of you, and you repaid kindness with enmity." Nancy looked at the shattered glass on the floor and suddenly laughed. "What if I told you she hurt me first? Would you believe me? Nonsense, Mr. Hamilton snapped. Natalie is so kind. How could she possibly hurt you? Even if she accidentally caused you pain, you should have endured it. How could you push her? Nancy let out a low chuckle, laughing until tears rolled down her cheeks. Indeed, even if Natalie had killed her, they would probably only care about whether Natalie's hand hurt. Do you know, she suddenly spoke. Her voice so soft it was almost like talking to herself. 3 years ago, I took a paternity test. Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton were stunned. What? The results showed that I am indeed your biological daughter. She raised her head, her eyes bloodshot. Do you have any idea how devastated I was the moment I saw the results? Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton said in disbelief. What do you mean? What I mean is, she enunciated each word as if baring her heart. Even though we're all your biological children, you can actually be this biased. Mrs. Hamilton paled momentarily but quickly regained her cold composure. Enough of this nonsense. If you had even a fraction of Natalie's sensibility, we wouldn't treat you this way. Go barefoot right now. And don't even think about coming out until you've knelt for a full day and night. Mr. Hamilton simply waved his hand, and the bodyguards immediately stepped forward to force her to her knees. I'll do it myself. Nancy shook off their hands and slowly removed her shoes. She walked barefoot on broken glass. A sharp pain instantly spread from the soles of her feet throughout her body, each step feeling like treading on knife blades. Blood seeped out, staining the ground red. Yet her expression remained blank as she moved forward step by step. Finally, she collapsed heavily to her knees. Her knee slammed into the glass, the excruciating pain making her vision go black, yet she clenched her teeth hard, refusing to let herself collapse. Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton stared at her coldly before turning away, leaving only these words, "You're not allowed to get up before the time is up." The ancestral hall's door was shut. Nancy knelt in a pool of blood, trembling all over. As time passed minute by minute, her consciousness grew increasingly hazy. The blood on the ground kept pooling, her vision began to darken, and her body swayed unsteadily, just as she was about to faint. The door of the ancestral hall was violently flung open. Nancy, in her dazed state, she seemed to see Hayden rushing in, his voice filled with unprecedented panic, but she could hold on no longer. Darkness enveloped her vision as she completely lost consciousness. Immersive translate. When she woke again, Nancy found herself lying in her familiar bedroom. The wounds on her back and knees had been bandaged, yet the pain remained sharp and clear. Awake, a low voice came from beside her. Slowly turning her head, she met Hayden's bloodshot eyes. He seemed to have been waiting for a long time, his tie loosely undone, even his chin sporting a stubble. "Sorry, I'm late," he said, gently pulling her into his embrace, his palm resting against the back of her head. His voice hoarse beyond recognition. "It's okay now, I'm here. Don't be afraid." His embrace was still warm, his heartbeat steady and strong, yet Nancy remained stiff, her heart feeling as if it were being tightly clenched by an invisible hand. Every time before, when she was punished by her parents, it was Hayden who came to her rescue. Back then, she only saw him as her salvation, the sole light in the darkness. But now, she only understood, he was more detestable than her parents. He gave her hope, only to personally destroy it. "What's wrong?" Hayden noticed her silence and looked down at her. "Are you still feeling unwell? Should I call the private doctor to check on you?" "No need." She clenched the corner of the blanket, her voice hoarse. "Just a bit of a headache." Hayden frowned but still stood up. "I'll get you some medicine." He walked toward the nightstand, his slender fingers pulling open the drawer. Nancy's pupils suddenly contracted. That is, the drawer where she placed the baby. Hayden had just opened the drawer when he saw a gift box placed inside. "What's this?" He frowned, his slender fingers resting on the ribbon, about to lift it open. "Don't move." Nancy suddenly fell off the bed, the wound on her knee tearing with pain, but she didn't care. Snatching the gift box and shoving it back into the drawer, Hayden paused for a moment, then laughed lightly. "What? Keeping secrets from me now? You have secrets you haven't told me too, don't you?" She looked up at him, her voice as light as a feather. Hayden remained expressionless as he reached out to ruffle her hair. "How could there be secrets between you and me?" She looked into his gentle eyes, feeling as if her heart were being slowly carved by a blunt knife. He acted too well. Those deep-set eyes were so tender they could drown a person. As if he truly regarded her as the love of his life, Nancy thought to herself, how could she not be deceived? She was utterly deceived, almost to the point of having her child's bone marrow taken away. Fortunately, Hayden didn't press further. He just had the servant buy new medicine and personally fed it to her. In the days that followed, he cancelled all his work and stayed by her side without leaving for a moment, He bought out the entire jewelry store for her just because she glanced at the window display. He learned to cook pregnancy meals himself, smiling through cut fingers and saying it didn't hurt. At night when she turned over, he'd wake instantly to carefully tuck her back in, the perfect husband. But Nancy knew he'd sneak to the hospital to visit Natalie after she fell asleep. She'd seen the texts he sent his assistant, Natalie. How's your heart rate today? Don't stop the painkillers. She's afraid of the pain. Keep me updated at all times. Meanwhile, Natalie brazenly sent provocative pictures. In the picture, Hayden sits by Natalie's hospital bed, gently feeding her porridge. In the picture, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton gather around Natalie, their faces filled with heartache as they comfort her. There's even a surveillance video. In the hospital room, Hayden leans down and softly kisses the forehead of the sleeping Natalie. His gaze so tender it could drown someone in affection. Natalie sent a message. Look, how can you beat me? Nancy's tears silently fell on the phone screen. At that moment, the door was pushed open. Why are you crying? Hayden hurried in, wiping the corner of her eye with his fingertip. Is the baby bothering you again? As he spoke, he leaned down to listen for fetal movements. Nancy shrank back slightly. It's nothing. I just watched a touching video. What video could make our Nancy cry like this? He playfully tapped her nose while smiling. A video about lovers finally uniting in marriage. Hayden chuckled. Why so sentimental lately? Crying just because others got together. She lowered her lashes. Because love is too hard. Finding someone you love, who also loves you back, and making it work. It's just too rare. Hearing this, Hayden gently cupped her face with a soft laugh, saying earnestly, never mind others, just remember, I love you, and I love you too, we'll be together forever. His gaze was so sincere, as if the whole world could only hold her. Nancy vaguely remembered the look in his eyes when he said I do before the priest on their wedding day. It was the same. How could she not fall for him? She fell completely, and was deceived to the point of losing everything. But now, she has found the trick to avoid being hurt. As long as she doesn't love, she won't feel pain. So she played along with him, nodding calmly. Yes, as long as we love each other, that's enough. Hayden smiled contentedly and pulled her into his embrace. Hayden, on the day of his business trip, he gave instructions to every servant in the villa. Madam prefers lukewarm water, not too hot. Prepare fresh fruit every day at 3 p.m. and remove the stems from the strawberries. She tends to kick off the blanket at night. Remember to check on her a few times. He stood at the entrance, impeccably dressed in a suit, his eyes gentle as he leaned down to kiss Nancy's forehead. Wait for me, be good. Nancy nodded with a smile, watching his car disappear around the corner. The moment she turned around, the smile vanished from her face. The servants were still marveling. The master is utterly devoted to his wife. Nancy paid no attention and went straight back to her room to start packing her luggage. Suddenly, the front door was violently flung open. Natalie stumbled in, covered in blood, her face deathly pale. Nancy frowned but said nothing, continuing to pack her luggage with her head down. Natalie trembled as she dialed the phone. Dad, Mom, what should I do? I've killed someone. On the other end of the line, Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton responded in panic. Natalie, what happened? I went to watch a movie, and a thug harassed me. Natalie sobbed uncontrollably. I hit him with a stone, and he fainted on the spot. I didn't dare check his breathing. Don't be afraid, Mom and Dad are coming right away. In less than 10 minutes, Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton arrived at the villa. As soon as they entered, they rushed over to hug Natalie, wiping the blood from her face with heartache. Natalie, don't be afraid, Mom and Dad are here. Natalie cried uncontrollably. Dad, Mom, the police will definitely find me soon. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go in. Mr. Hamilton asked in a low voice. Did that thug get a clear look at your face? He was drunk, probably didn't see clearly. Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton exchanged glances, then suddenly turned their gaze toward the silent Nancy. You will take Natalie's place and confess. Nancy looked up, momentarily unable to believe what she had heard. What? Mrs. Hamilton stepped forward, her tone firm. Your sister has leukemia. Sending her to detention would be a death sentence. When Hayden returns, with his influence, getting you out will be as easy as a few words. I won't go, Nancy shouted, her eyes red and voice hoarse. Natalie is your daughter, but am I not yours too? Slap. Mrs. Hamilton slapped her hard. You're going whether you want to or not. Mr. Hamilton went straight for a karate chop to the back of her neck. A sharp pain shot through her. Nancy saw darkness before her eyes, and in her last moments of consciousness, she heard her parents say to Natalie, don't be afraid, when the police come, Just tell them your sister is mentally unstable and has violent tendencies. Nancy woke up to a piercing chill. Opening her eyes, she saw a mottled, moldy ceiling above her, while beneath her was a damp and icy hard bed. Awake, came the policeman's icy voice from beyond the iron bars. Your parents personally identified you for intentional assault. The evidence is conclusive. You're officially under arrest. She opened her mouth, but her throat was too parched to make a sound. They really sent her in, for Natalie. They pushed her into hell without hesitation. 3 days in prison felt as long as 3 years. On the first night, her cellmate stole her coat and forced her to sleep next to the toilet. What are you looking at? The other person grabbed her hair and slammed her head against the wall. Can't take it, princess, then go die. On the second night, she was shoved into a temporary cell shared by both men and women. New here. A man with a face full of flesh grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. Wanna have some fun with us? She struggled desperately, scratching bloody marks on the man's face with her nails, only to be met with a brutal beating. In the end, it was only when the prison guards heard the commotion that they barely managed to save her. On the third night, she lay curled up in a corner with a high fever, overhearing whispers from the female prisoner next door. I heard her husband is the CEO of the Elton Family Corporation. Then why is she still here? Must be fake, right? Of course it's fake. Nancy buried her face in her knees and laughed silently. After all, when she was imprisoned, where was the man who kept saying he loved her? On the morning of the fourth day, the iron door suddenly opened. Nancy, someone has posted bail for you. Staggering outside, the blinding sunlight made her instinctively close her eyes. When she opened them again, Hayden stood not far away, impeccably dressed in a suit, as handsome as a deity. Nancy, he hurried forward and pulled her into his arms. I'm sorry I'm late. His embrace was warm and clean, carrying the familiar scent of cedar, a stark contrast to the foul stench of the prison. Don't worry, I've taken care of everything. He gently kissed the top of her head. It's all right now. Nancy remained motionless in his embrace until his hand instinctively moved to rest on her belly. After confirming the fake bump was still in place, he let out an almost imperceptible sigh of relief. How ridiculous, she nearly died in prison, yet his first reaction was to check if the child was safe. From now on, as long as I'm here, nothing like this will ever happen again, he promised, cupping her face in his hands. Nancy looked up at him. Are you sure? What, if you had been there, and they forced you to choose between detaining me or Natalie? She asked softly. Would you really have chosen to protect me and abandon her? Hayden froze. His silence was like a knife, plunging precisely into her already battered heart. Of course I would choose to protect you, he finally spoke after a long pause, his voice hoarse. You and our baby are the people I love most. Nancy smiled. As she smiled, tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't expose his lie, but gently pushed him away and walked forward without looking back. She was tired. I'm really tired. After returning home, Nancy, the first thing she did was take a shower. The sound of water in the bathroom was splashing loudly. Nancy stood in front of the mirror, her fingers trembling as she unbuttoned her clothes and pulled out the fake pillow stuffed inside. Her flat stomach was exposed to the air, childless, covered only in scars. The phone let out a ding as it rang. She looked down to see Natalie had sent a video. In the footage, Natalie was half lying on the bed, her face glowing, yet Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton flanked her on either side, one peeling an apple, the other feeding her water, their faces full of concern. Dad, Mom, don't you want to visit sister in prison? Natalie asked hypocritically. I heard the conditions there are terrible. What are you looking at her for, Mr. Hamilton? Mrs. Hamilton snorted coldly. Your sister is thick-skinned and tough. A little injury won't hurt her. The scene shifts. Hayden walks in holding a bowl of porridge and sits gently by the bedside. Just made it. Drink it while it's hot, Natalie said sweetly. Brother-in-law, as soon as you came back and found out I had a fever, you stayed by my side. But I only have a mild fever. You should go take care of sister's matters and let her out. Hayden didn't even look up, gently blowing on the porridge to cool it. Don't worry about her. I'll go get her after you're better. At the end of the video, Natalie flashes a triumphant smile at the camera. Slap. The phone slipped from her palm and hit the ground with a heavy thud. Nancy finally broke down, squatting on the ground and wailing uncontrollably. She curled up on the cold tiles, trembling violently as she cried, her tears mixing with the damp patches beneath her, forming a pool of salty sorrow. How ridiculous. She almost died in prison, and they, her parents, her husband, the people she once thought were closest to her, not a single one cared whether she lived or died. In the days that followed, Hayden seemed to notice Nancy's unusual behavior and finally had Natalie move out. He began to stay by her side every moment, tender and attentive, leaving no detail overlooked, but Nancy knew that his concern was never for her, but for the child in her womb. Until one day, Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton called, asking Hayden to bring her home for dinner. In the car, Hayden saw her expressionless face and thought she was afraid of the fire incident at the last family banquet. He held her in his arms and gently comforted her. "Sweetheart, don't be afraid, this time, I'm here, and nothing will happen to you." Nancy closed her eyes and did not respond. At the dining table, she silently ate plain rice. Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton kept serving dishes to Natalie. "Natalie, eat more, you've lost weight." Hayden sat beside her, seemingly attentive, but his gaze frequently drifted to Natalie. She dropped her chopsticks, and he immediately handed her a new pair. Her cup was empty, and he promptly stood up to pour water. A bit of sauce lingered at the corner of her lips, and he instinctively grabbed a tissue. Natalie pouted playfully. All right, it's rare for my sister to come back home. I eat Mom and Dad's cooking every day, so let me serve some to my sister instead." Mr. Hamilton Mrs. Hamilton glanced at Nancy and said sarcastically, "What's the point of serving her? You expect her to eat it too. She always comes back with that gloomy face, as if we owe her something." "Yes, ever since she was little, she only eats plain rice at home, never touches a single bite of the dishes." Nancy put down her chopsticks and slowly stood up. "The reason I only eat plain rice every time is because I'm allergic to seafood," she said softly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "And because Natalie loves seafood, you only ever cook seafood dishes." She looked at Hayden, her eyes utterly lifeless. "I just want to live, is that wrong?" After speaking, she turned and walked away. Natalie hurriedly chased after her, hypocritically grabbing her arm. "Sis, don't be angry, Mom and Dad didn't mean it." Nancy was about to shake her off when she suddenly heard a neighbor shout, "Move, get out of the way." She turned her head abruptly to see a wolfhound that had broken free from its leash lunging straight at them. In the blink of an eye, Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton and Hayden all rushed out without hesitation, shielding Natalie. Meanwhile, Nancy had her arm viciously bitten, tearing off a chunk of flesh. The excruciating pain darkened her vision, but what hurt even more was, in her blurred sight, Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton were anxiously checking Natalie for any injuries. Hayden even held her tightly in his arms, whispering comfort. "It's okay, Natalie, it's okay." No one glanced her way. Blood dripped down her arm. Nancy, but she felt no pain. It turns out that the most painful thing is the heart. Immersive translate. Nancy woke up to find herself lying on a hospital bed. The wound on her arm had been bandaged, with a faint throbbing pain beneath the gauze. In the ward, Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton and Hayden were gathered around the doctor, anxiously asking questions. "How is the child? Has it been affected?" Nancy, her fingers trembled slightly as she suddenly raised her hand and shattered the water glass by the bedside. Slap. The sound of breaking glass finally caught their attention. "I'm fine," she said calmly. "The baby is fine too." The doctor gave her a puzzled look, hesitated as if wanting to say something, but ultimately remained silent and turned to leave. Mrs. Hamilton let out a relieved sigh and frowned, saying, "You didn't even try to avoid the dog. Thank goodness the baby's fine." At 7 months along, if anything had happened, she left the sentence unfinished, but Nancy understood what they meant. If anything happened to the baby, Natalie would lose her bone marrow. She nearly blurted it out. Natalie was never sick at all. She fooled everyone by pretending to be ill, yet in the end, she simply lowered her eyes and said nothing. They meticulously planned and schemed for her, only to end up being Natalie's playthings. This surprise should be saved for a more grand occasion to give to them. Hayden walked to the bedside and explained in a low voice, "Nancy, I mistook someone else for you at the time. I wanted to protect you, but it's okay." She smiled slightly, interrupting him. "I understand." She didn't want to hear his lies, perhaps fearing that the child in her womb might face another mishap. In the following days, Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton along with Hayden stayed at the hospital to take care of her. But their hearts were not here at all. Mrs. Hamilton kept glancing at her phone, afraid of missing Natalie's messages. Mr. Hamilton excused himself to smoke, but actually went to call Natalie. Hayden, though sitting beside her, kept looking out the window. Nancy watched coldly, thinking, it will all be over soon. On the day of her discharge, she received a call from the temple. "Benefactor, you may come for the tonsure ceremony tomorrow. Are you prepared?" "I'm ready," she replied softly. Just as she hung up the phone, Hayden pushed the door open and asked, "Who were you talking to?" "No one," she said. Putting away her phone with an unchanged expression, Hayden walked up to her and said softly, "Tomorrow is Natalie's birthday. I've arranged a party for her, shall we go together?" Nancy neither agreed nor refused. Hayden thought she had tacitly consented. But the next morning, Nancy suddenly complained of a stomachache. "I'm not feeling well, you can go without me." Hayden frowned. "What's wrong?" "I'll stay with you. The baby's kicking a lot," she whispered. "But one of us should go. Otherwise it wouldn't be proper." "You go ahead. I've already prepared the gift, and I'll have someone deliver it later." Hayden hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. "All right. Call me immediately if anything comes up." After he left, Nancy slowly stood up and took out 3 carefully prepared gifts. The first one was for Hayden. Inside was a divorce agreement and that child preserved in formaldehyde. The second one was for Mr. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton. Inside was a parent-child severance agreement. The third item was a surprise for everyone. Natalie admitted to faking her illness and personally revealed in the video USB that the person Hayden fell in love with at first sight was actually Nancy. She wrapped the gift, called for a courier, and coldly instructed, "Deliver it to Natalie's birthday party, and make sure it's opened in front of everyone." Then, carrying her luggage, she left for the temple without looking back. Immersive translate. At the ordination ceremony, patron, to enter our Buddhist order, you must sever all worldly ties and desires, never to be tainted by the mortal world again in this lifetime, the elderly nun said, looking at her. "Are you truly certain about this?" Nancy gazed at her reflection in the mirror, her pale face showing not a ripple of emotion. "I've made up my mind." She closed her eyes, her voice soft yet resolute. The razor fell, and strands of black hair tumbled to the ground. "From this day forth, your monastic name shall be Wu Ai, no love." Meanwhile, Natalie's birthday celebration was extravagantly grand. Dressed in an exquisite gown, she sweetly smiled as she held onto the arms of Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton and Hayden, saying, "Mom, Dad, brother-in-law, you've thrown such a grand banquet for me and given me such precious gifts. I'm truly the happiest." Hayden gazed at her adoringly, while Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton softly said, "We only wish for your safety and health. Natalie, don't be afraid, you'll be safe soon." Natalie curved her lips into a faint smile. She knew they were referring to saving her with the bone marrow of Nancy's child. Natalie felt smug and was about to speak when suddenly, "Miss the Second, these are gifts from your elder sister," the courier loudly announced. 3 grand presents. Please open them in front of everyone." The eyes of all the guests instantly focused on the scene. Natalie was momentarily stunned, then smiled triumphantly. "How thoughtful of my sister." Then, in front of everyone, she opened the first gift. "Ah!" A scream instantly echoed through the entire banquet hall. "Nancy, who let her send such a thing? Is she insane? Throw it away immediately." Mrs. Hamilton stammered with trembling lips, barely managing to utter a complete sentence. The banquet hall fell into dead silence as everyone gathered around curiously. Upon seeing the contents of the box, expressions of stunned disbelief spread across the faces of the crowd. Inside the transparent glass jar, a 7-month-old fetus curled up like a sleeping infant, the formaldehyde solution casting an eerie cold glow under the light. Natalie screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over the champagne tower behind her. Mr. Hamilton turned livid and stormed forward in 3 strides, flipping over the gift box. "Has that wretched woman lost her mind? How dare she use such a thing to curse my sister?" A sudden burst of jarring static noise pierced the air, followed immediately by the sound of video playback. A chilling female voice erupted from the projection speakers, stabbing into everyone's eardrums like an ice pick. Natalie whirled around abruptly, only to see her own face appear on the giant screen. That was her making a phone call in the hospital ward, her smugly raised eyebrows painfully glaring. "My leukemia was fake. Hayden thought it was love at first sight with me. But the one playing the violin was Nancy." The fragments of the champagne tower were still rolling. Hayden couldn't hear a sound. Memories surged back like a tidal wave in his mind. On the mid-autumn night 7 years ago, he heard Moonlight Sonata in Elton's garden. As he followed the sound, the girl by the pool was being pushed into the water by Natalie. As he took off his suit jacket, he saw the girl's tear-streaked face, her eyes glinting like shattered diamonds. Only to realize those weren't Natalie's eyes. Impossible. Natalie's voice deflated like a punctured balloon. "That video was doctored. It's Nancy who framed me." She lunged at Hayden, only to be shoved away with such force that she fell onto shattered glass. Hayden's fingertips traced Nancy's face in the projection, the contours he'd kissed countless times. He remembered that on their wedding night, she nestled in his arms and said, "Actually, I learned to play the violin when I was little. But after the strings broke, I never touched it again." He kissed the corner of her eye at the time, teasing her for not mentioning it sooner, unaware that she had already left a fleeting yet unforgettable impression in his life. Mr. Hayden. These are the hospital records left by Ms. Nancy. The assistant suddenly appeared, and an ultrasound report slipped out of the file folder he handed over. Hayden caught sight of the words induced abortion consent form blurred by tear stains. The very document he had signed with his own hand, the words 7 months in the date column stung his eyes like needles. It turned out that while she was lying alone on the operating table, he had been Natalie's hospital room feeding her lotus seed porridge. Mr. Hamilton's roar suddenly exploded. Call the police immediately, make sure that bastard never sees the light of day again. He grabbed the wine bottle from the table and hurled it at the projection, amid the shattering glass. Nancy's face fragmented into countless specks of light. Hayden suddenly remembered how terrified she was of thunder, how she would tremble in his arms every stormy night, and now, he didn't even know where she was. Hayden, Natalie clutched his sleeve, her voice shaking as she pleaded, "You'll believe me, won't you? It must be that stupid woman trying to frame me. She planted all that fake evidence to humiliate me. You'll protect me, right? Who allowed you to speak of her?" He looked down at her, his expression fierce, his voice as cold as ice. "On that mid-autumn festival 7 years ago, you wore a pink chiffon dress, while she wore a blue and white striped shirt. My mother's favorite style before she passed." He shook off her hand, the cream on his suit cuff now disgustingly sticky. "You're not even worth a single strand of her hair." The banquet hall doors were flung open by the gale, as the storm surged in, carrying ginkgo leaves with it. Hayden recalled her saying ginkgo leaves resemble butterflies, so he had someone plant a ginkgo tree in the courtyard. Yet he never knew her true fondness was for the old trees that grew naturally along the streets and alleys. He pulled out his phone, the screen filled with unsent messages. "Sweetheart, what would you like to eat today? Has the baby been kicking you?" The latest one, sent 3 hours ago, read, "I'm picking out Natalie's birthday gift. I'll be back later to keep you company, Mr. Hayden, Ms. Nancy's phone signal was last detected near the Qingxi nunnery." The assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. Hayden grabbed his coat and rushed out the door. Passing the gift table, he saw the third gift box lying quietly, a jade piece not pinned to its satin ribbon. It was the token he'd slipped into her palm when proposing. She'd laughed then, saying she'd wear it on their wedding day. Now it had become a farewell memento. Rain pelted his face as he suddenly remembered her always saying rainy days are made for sleeping. She had long seen through it. The love he gave was nothing but a damp dream, and in the end, she drowned in that dream, leaving him alone in reality, clutching shattered fragments, searching for the one who would never return. In the banquet hall, Natalie's sobs mingled with the murmurs of the guests. Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton stood pale-faced before the media cameras, and Hayden's figure, dashing into the curtain of rain, was eerily reminiscent of the boy who had once risked everything to save a girl, only this time the one he sought to save had long been pushed away by his own hands. Ginkgo leaves fell upon the ruined cake, sweetness mingling with bitterness. Someone picked up the dropped USB drive and found a video inside. Nancy in a hospital gown smiled at the camera, wearing the jade bracelet he gave her. With the white walls of the hospital corridor behind her, she whispered, "Hayden, I knew all along you had mistaken me for someone else, but I was greedy. I wanted to feel loved for a few more days." At the end of the footage, her fingers brushed over her swollen belly. "I'm sorry I couldn't save your Natalie." Before the screen went black, droplets hit the lens, unclear whether they were tears or rain. At this moment, the real Nancy stood beneath the ginkgo tree of Qingxi nunnery, letting the rain soak through her monastic robe. She removed the jade bracelet from her wrist and watched it roll into the pile of fallen leaves. It was the first gift he had given her. And now she could finally return it. In the distance, faint thunder rumbled. She pulled out the prayer beads from her pocket and suddenly remembered the old nun's words. "Patron, obsession is like a torrential rain. It will eventually wash away all pretenses." The wind swept ginkgo leaves past her shoulders, just like that morning when he gently brushed fallen leaves from her hair and whispered, "Nancy, you're even more beautiful than the ginkgo tree." But now, the tree remains while the people have scattered, leaving only the starlight like shattered diamonds on the ground, unable to illuminate any returning soul. The storm lashed against the ornate iron gates of the most upscale villa district. Hayden's leather shoes trampled over the ginkgo leaves strewn across the ground, mud splashing from the tips. As he raised his hand to press the doorbell, his knuckles turned white from excessive force. This was his third visit to the empty villa. 72 hours since Nancy had vanished. "Mr. Hayden, we've searched the entire building. The assistant stood behind him, head bowed, his voice tinged with unease. Only this was found in the master bedroom drawer. The dark brown walnut drawer was slowly pulled open, revealing a divorce agreement with a gilded cover lying quietly inside. Alongside a crumpled hospital bill, Hayden's pupils suddenly contracted, and his trembling fingertips reached for the bill. The date on the induced abortion record stung his eyes, and the signature Nancy at the bottom was pressed so hard into the paper it looked like a deep wound. Bang! He slammed the drawer shut with a heavy thud. Hayden turned and strode toward the garage, his black suit jacket flaring behind him with a sharp, decisive arc. Amid the roar of the engine, he dialed his private physician, his voice laced with suppressed fury. "You have 10 minutes to get in front of me." The antiseptic smell of the private hospital made Hayden's temples throb violently. He seized the doctor by the throat, slamming him against the wall, his tie hanging loose around his neck, revealing veins bulging with rage. "Talk, where did she have the surgery?" The doctor's face turned deathly pale as he spoke with trembling lips. "Mr. Hayden, at that time Ms. Nancy insisted on having the abortion, and with your personal signature, we didn't dare refuse the child." Hayden's voice was like frozen steel, his eyes brimming with murderous intent. "The 7-month-old fetus has already been disposed of." Before the doctor could finish speaking, Hayden violently threw him to the ground. Hayden staggered back 2 steps, leaning against the wall as he slowly slid down to sit on the floor. Suddenly, the memory of that rainy night 3 years ago surfaced in his mind, the sound of a violin weeping in the garden. A girl in a white dress standing beneath the ginkgo tree, a golden leaf caught in her hair as she turned. He remembered his heart pounding like a drum, believing it was a fateful encounter. But later by the pool, when Natalie smiled and said, "I was the one playing the violin," he never doubted it. He thought he had fallen for the figure struggling in the water, unaware that what truly stirred his heart was the girl playing the violin in the garden. "Nancy, Mr. Hayden, the Hamiltons." The assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. Hayden stood up, straightened his suit, a flash of ruthlessness in his eyes, cut off all their funding channels, and let the media give the Hamiltons some special attention. Outside the Hamilton family's ancestral home, the reporters' camera flashes flickered incessantly. Like a pack of hungry vultures, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton were cornered at the entrance, microphones practically shoved in their faces. "May I ask Miss Nancy if she truly intended to harm her sister?" The Elton family group severed the Hamilton family's funding chain. Was it because of Miss Nancy's disappearance? Natalie hid behind the curtains, watching the chaotic scene below, her fingertips tightly clutching the fabric. Suddenly, with a loud bang, a can of red paint smashed against the door, seeping through the gap and flowing into the entryway, forming a startling blood-like trail across the white marble floor. "Vicious bitch, come out right now. Murderer still dares to hide." The curses came one after another. Natalie took 2 steps back in fear, stumbling and falling to the ground in panic. At that moment, the phone suddenly rang. It was Hayden's assistant calling. "Miss Nancy, Mr. Hayden said that starting today, the Hamilton family's all business dealings are terminated." The voice on the phone was cold and merciless. Natalie felt a wave of dizziness, as if the sky had collapsed. Mr. Hamilton knelt in the Elton family group's grand hall, his graying hair disheveled, his face streaked with tears. "Mr. Hayden, please spare the Hamilton family a way out." Hayden stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the city below, his voice devoid of any warmth. "A way out? When you plotted to harm Nancy, why didn't you think of giving her a way out? Those were all misunderstandings. How could I possibly harm my own child?" Mr. Hamilton tried to defend himself, but was interrupted by Hayden. "Get out," Hayden said coldly, turning away without looking at him. He returned to the villa and opened that drawer again. The signature on the divorce agreement was still clear, and the abortion record beside it seemed to retain some warmth. He reached out and touched the inner wall of the drawer, suddenly feeling a raised pattern. Looking down, he saw a small character for sleep, carved shallowly but clearly. Memories flooded in like a tide. He recalled a certain morning after their wedding, Nancy leaning against his chest, gently scratching the drawer with her fingernail. "From now on, this will be our secret base." At the time, he smiled and held her hand, saying, "My secrets are only for you to know." But now, in this secret base, only pain and regret remained. Hayden took out his phone, tapped on the number he had long pinned at the top, and tears instantly welled up in his eyes, unable to hold back any longer. He finally pressed the call button. The familiar automated voice came from the other end of the line. "The number you have dialed is currently switched off." Hayden closed his eyes and hurled the phone violently against the wall. Amid the sound of the shattering screen, He seemed to hear the sound of his own heart breaking. The rain continues to fall, scattering the ginkgo leaves in disarray. Hayden stands by the window, gazing at the distant city lights. When suddenly he recalls the girl playing the violin during their first encounter, only now does he realize that, unknowingly, he has already missed the most precious person in his life, and this time, perhaps she can never be found again. In the late spring, the Pure Heart Monastery was filled with the scent of sandalwood. Nancy knelt on the prayer cushion in the Buddha hall, her fingertips tracing the golden characters on the scripture. The elderly nun, Abbess Jingxi, entered carrying a teacup. Her gaze settled on Nancy, and she sighed softly. Have you ever heard, benefactor, that no matter how thick the monk's robe, it cannot conceal the folds of the human heart? Nancy lowered her eyes and pressed her palms together, her voice as light as morning dew. Abbess, this humble nun has severed all worldly ties. Jingxi placed a string of agarwood prayer beads in her palm, the beads carved with the characters tranquil heart, their surface glowing with a warm patina. The candlelight before the Buddha illuminates the scriptures, but not the obsessions. These beads have accompanied me for 30 years. I give them to you for tranquility. A sudden clap of thunder erupted outside the hermitage, and the rain poured down in torrents. Nancy gazed at the curtain of rain falling from the eaves, her mind drifting back to that rainy night 3 years ago. Hayden had braved the storm to buy her sweet fermented rice balls, his suit shoulders dripping with water. Yet he smiled tenderly. Try them quickly, they're still warm. A knock at the door shattered her reverie. A young nun hurried over, her voice flustered. Aunt Wu Ai, there's a man at the mountain gate, kneeling covered in blood. Nancy clutched the prayer beads tightly, the sandalwood digging painfully into her palm. As she stood up, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, dressed in a gray monastic robe, her brows sharp as blades. Appearing even more austere than the bamboo branches outside the nunnery, at the mountain gate, Hayden knelt on the stone slab, his black suit soaked to a dark gray, clinging to his back and outlining his gaunt shoulder blades. Water dripped from his hair, mingling with blood from his temple, tracing a dark red line down the stone steps. The moment he saw Nancy, a light flared in his crimson eyes, and his knees scraped against the stone with a grating sound. Nancy, don't disturb me again. Nancy stood under the corridor eaves, her voice cutting through the roaring rain as sharply as cracking ice. Hayden trembled violently, reaching to grasp her wrist but recoiling abruptly upon touching the monastic robe. He looked up at her, rainwater mingling with bloody tears dripping from his jaw. I've searched for you 3 months. They said you were here. If the benefactor comes to worship Buddha, please wait in the guest hall. Nancy turned to leave when a sudden thud sounded behind her. Hayden kowtowed heavily, blood droplets splattering on the stone floor. I was wrong. Please scold me, hit me, just don't look at me with those eyes. Her footsteps halted where she stood. Memories surged like tidal waves. The man who always patted her back during nightmares, the man who said I'll be good to you for a lifetime, now resembled a beast broken by the storm, his voice shattered to dust. Mr. Hayden, she turned. Buddhist prayer beads circling 3 times between her fingers. In this world, not getting what you seek is the norm. Hayden raised his head, his gaze firmly fixed on the scars on her wrist, his Adam's apple bobbing as he let out a broken sob. The child, I know now. The things in the drawer. He suddenly coughed violently, blood splattering onto the bluestone pavement. I was blind. I was mad. You were right in front of me. Yet I... Nancy watched the blood continuously seeping from his temple, her nails digging deep into her palms. Abbess Jingxi had appeared beside her at some point, gently pressing a hand on her shoulder, the warmth of her palm seeping through the monastic robe. Back then in Elton's garden, she heard her own voice cutting through the curtain of rain, calm as if recounting someone else's story. I was wearing a white dress playing the violin. Natalie deliberately claimed it was her. You glanced at her and just assumed. Hayden suddenly looked up, his pupils contracting violently, through the curtain of rain. Nancy's silhouette overlapped with the memory of that white-clad girl turning away. He suddenly recalled the ginkgo leaf caught in her hair during their first meeting. How strikingly similar it was to the desolation in her eyes now. I thought you loved me. She chuckled softly. The prayer beads clicking faintly in the rain. Only later did I realize you were in love with your own obsession. That's not true. Hayden struggled to his feet, stumbling toward her, only to be blocked by Abbess Jingxi's raised hand. He gazed at Nancy, his eyes surging with agony and despair. I'll take you away. We'll start over. I've exposed all of Natalie's videos. The Hamilton family has already collapsed. Will you forgive me? I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. What does that have to do with me? Nancy interrupted him, her face full of indifference. Mr. Hayden, look at this heavy rain. It falls on the roofs of the rich and the bowls of the beggars alike. Has it ever shown favor, just like that fire years ago? My parents protected Natalie, and you held me, both thinking it was love. Hayden trembled all over, finally understanding the unspoken words in her voice. So they had all, in misplaced love, mistaken selfishness for devotion. Give me a chance to atone. His voice was so low it seemed to shatter like a sigh in the rain. Even if it means I stay outside the nunnery, watching you from afar. Nancy turned and walked toward the prayer hall, the curtain of rain closing behind her. Abbess Jinxie handed a clean handkerchief to Hayden, saying softly, Patron, obsession is like a net. The more you struggle, the tighter it binds. The candle flames in the Buddhist hall flickered uncertainly. Nancy knelt back onto the prayer cushion, the rosary beads rustling softly as they turned in her palm. The scars on her wrists were hidden beneath the monastic robe, just like those painful memories that would eventually be soothed by the sandalwood fragrance of time. The rain outside the nunnery gradually lightened, and a young nun's voice could be heard. Why is that benefactor Fu still kneeling at the mountain gate? Abbess Jinxie watched Nancy's profile as she bowed her head in prayer. Shaking her head gently, some tribulations people must endure cannot be dissuaded even by the Buddha. Nancy's fingertips paused at the scripture passage. All conditioned phenomena are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, outside the window. Bamboo branches swayed in the wind, casting dappled shadows. She suddenly remembered the Buddhist beads Jinxie had given her. Looking down, the character's tranquility emitted a soft glow under the candlelight, surprisingly resembling Hayden's glistening tears. When the morning bell of Qingshin Temple pierced through the mist, Nancy was wiping the Buddhist beads before a bronze mirror. In the mirror, the woman in gray monastic robes had delicate, slender features, with a faint pink scar like a crescent moon slanting across her wrist, a mark left by the induced abortion 3 months prior. The elderly nun Jinxie entered carrying a bowl of medicinal soup, her gaze resting on the wrist. The lilies on the back hill have bloomed. Would you like to pick some to bring back? She lowered her gaze, fiddling with the prayer beads, and gently shook her head. Before the words had even faded, a young nun hurried over, clutching a bunch of white lilies still damp with dew, and called out loudly, Master Wulai. Someone sent flowers from the foot of the mountain. The lilies stood tall and graceful in the celadon vase, yet carried an indescribable air of eeriness. Each bloom had its stamens carefully removed, leaving only the pure white petals. Nancy's fingers trembled as she recalled Hayden's pre-wedding words. Lily pollen gives you rashes. I'll have the gardener remove them all beforehand. The log cabin at the mountain's base carried the scent of pine, where Hayden was using tweezers to pluck lily stamens. The windowsill held hundreds of crystal vases, each cradling meticulously trimmed white lilies with tiny anti-allergy pills settled at their bases. The assistant stood at the door, hesitating to speak. Mr. Hayden, Ms. Nancy has already rejected it over 10 times. What she likes are flowers, not my apologies. Without looking up, his fingertips bled from the rose thorns. Keep sending them until she accepts. The rainstorm arrived without warning. Nancy heard commotion at the mountain gate while copying scriptures in the meditation hall. Looking up, she saw Hayden drenched from head to toe, holding a blood-covered pilgrim in his arms, followed by a pale-faced young nun. Master Wuai, this person had ill intentions toward you. The Zen room's windows rattled violently under the pounding storm. Nancy only then noticing Hayden clutching a shard of broken glass in his right hand, blood dripping between his fingers onto the blue-gray bricks. His shirt was torn open at the chest, revealing a vicious old scar below the collarbone, a mark from being struck by a burning beam 3 years ago while saving Natalie. Does it hurt? The words escaped her lips before she could stop them. Nancy clutching the hem of her monk's robe tightly. Hayden jerked as if electrified, his eyes blazing with wild joy, only for the light to die abruptly when it met her frosty gaze. He looked down at the glass shards in his palm, his voice as light as if afraid to startle the morning dew. It doesn't hurt. It must have hurt a lot when Natalie poured alcohol on you and burned you, when Abbess Jinxie entered with the hemostatic medicine. She saw Hayden curled up in the corner, letting the young nun bandage him, but his gaze was fixed on the scars on Nancy's wrist. The old nun sighed softly and handed the medicine bottle to Nancy. Benefactor, the Buddha speaks of compassion. Why not apply the medicine to him yourself? The bowl of medicine burned hot in her palm. Nancy lowered her eyes to clean his wound, catching the scent of rain and cedar on him, momentarily transported back to the past. Back then, when her morning sickness was severe, he would always hold her in the bathroom to comfort her, his body radiating the same damp warmth. Nancy, Hayden S. Adams' apple bobbed. I planted a grove of ginkgo trees at the foot of the mountain. When autumn comes and the leaves turn yellow, Mr. Hayden, you've mistaken me for someone else. Nancy abruptly withdrew her hand, the blood on the cotton pad blooming into tiny flowers. The person you're looking for has long been dead, as she turned. The prayer beads suddenly snapped, scattering wooden pearls across the floor. While bending to pick them up, she saw Hayden standing in a pool of blood mixed with shards of glass, eerily reminiscent of the scene years ago when she had knelt on broken glass in the ancestral hall. Moonlight seeped into the meditation room late at night as Nancy counted the rest-rung prayer beads, when suddenly piano music drifted up from the foot of the mountain. The melody was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which she had once played in the garden, but with several wrong notes at the climax, the very passage Hayden had struggled with for 3 months yet never mastered. Early the next morning, the young nun came in holding a wooden box. Master Wu Ai. The benefactor Fu from the foot of the mountain said, "This is your birthday gift." Inside the sandalwood box lay a platinum bracelet, adorned with a ginkgo leaf pendant, inscribed with a tiny character Mion on the inner side. Beneath the box was pressed a sheet of music, with densely written red annotations marking the wrong notes. Nancy touched the cold metal pendant, recalling that night on her 20th birthday when Hayden had knelt on one knee to fasten a necklace around her neck. Solemnly promising, "Every year on this day, I will make you the happiest woman." The necklace has long been lost, leaving only this pendant, still carrying the warmth of his fingertips. The mountain wind swept fallen leaves past the windowsill as she suddenly stood and walked toward the back hill. White lilies swayed in the wind across the hills. Hayden's cabin nestled deep within the sea of flowers, with wisps of smoke curling from the chimney. She reached out to touch the petals, only to discover an antihistamine pill hidden in the heart of each bloom. Like some stubborn metaphor, "Nancy," Hayden's voice came from behind, trembling with unhoped for longing. "See, I remember all your preferences." As she turned, she noticed a ginkgo leaf caught in his hair, suddenly recalling that rainy year when he'd braved the storm to buy her fermented rice balls. His hair tips similarly glistening with droplets. Then, bitterness rose in her throat, yet transformed into a light breeze when she spoke. "Mr. Hayden, let it go." Yet he laughed, eyes burning with near-mad light. "I can't." He gently brushed the hair at her temple, his movement reminiscent of the times he used to pluck petals from her hair. "Even if you see through the vanity of life, I'll still be here, waiting until you look at me again." Nancy turned to leave when she heard the sound of prayer beads hitting the ground behind her. She knew some obsessions had long cocooned themselves, not easily unraveled, just like the lilies covering the mountain. No matter how abundantly they bloom, they will eventually wither. The night was deep. Hayden lay on the bed, gazing at the full moon in the night sky through the window. A sense of despair unlike anything before surged through his entire body like a tide. He raised his phone, looking at the wallpaper where the two of them were smiling cheek to cheek with eyes curved like crescents, and tears uncontrollably streamed down his face. Everything had once been so beautiful, yet he failed to cherish it properly, destroying it all. At this moment Hayden realized that perhaps nothing he could do would ever make up for the hurt he had caused Nancy. Under the torrent of countless complex emotions, he felt his psychological endurance had reached its limit. "Nancy." He murmured the name in a voice as hoarse as sandpaper. "I was wrong." The lighter's flame flared up with a whoosh, illuminating his suddenly pallid face. Without hesitation, he threw the lighter toward the corner soaked in kerosene. Flames erupted violently, instantly devouring the dry wooden planks. Thick smoke billowed upward, choking him into violent coughs as searing pain scorched his skin. Yet he laughed, tears streaming down his face, mingling with the soot. "I return my life to you." He staggered amidst the flames, his voice torn apart by the fire, yet with every ounce of strength, he screamed that name, "Nancy." Nancy felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest while copying scriptures in the nunnery. The brush in her hand fell onto the rice paper with a plop, the ink spreading into a disheveled black blot. She clutched her chest, her fingertips icy, as that familiar, bone-deep panic abruptly seized her heart. The young nun beside her watched with concern. She didn't speak. Almost instinctively rushing out of the nunnery, her mind was blank, with only one thought screaming wildly: Hayden was in trouble. By the time she reached the wooden cabin on the outskirts of the city, the flames were already towering into the sky. The heat waves burned her face from a distance, and the thick smoke made it almost impossible to see inside. She heard the gasps of the onlookers and the distant sirens of fire trucks, yet it was as if she heard nothing. Her eyes fixed solely on that wooden door warped by flames. "Hayden," she screamed hoarsely, her voice swallowed by the raging fire. Someone grabbed her, the fire's too intense, wait for the firefighters, it's too dangerous now, you can't go in. She shook off their hand and dashed into the inferno like a madwoman. The scorching heat instantly enveloped her, her hair singeing as thick smoke choked her breath. Stumbling through the sea of flames, her vision blurred by the smoke. She finally spotted the huddled figure in the corner. He lay motionless on the ground, the back of his clothes charred black. Hayden, she threw herself forward, yanking his arm with all her strength. The man was heavy, his skin frighteningly hot, gritting her teeth. She practically dragged him out of the sea of flames. Just as they rolled to safety, the wooden hut behind them collapsed with a thunderous crash, the scorching blast wave knocking her to the ground, ignoring the pain. She quickly scrambled up to check on him. Hayden was covered in wounds, his face blackened by smoke, only his lips a bloodless white. He burned into unconsciousness, his breathing faint, yet his chest still rose and fell. Nancy trembled as she checked his breath, and her tears finally broke free. The hospital's antiseptic smell stung the eyes. Hayden lay in the intensive care unit, his body wrapped in bandages, revealing only a face swollen red from the fever. Nancy sat by the bedside, watching the faint heartbeat line on the monitor, her fingertips unconsciously rubbing the Buddhist prayer beads she had taken from his palm. A few of the beads were cracked from the fire, pressing painfully into her palm. Nancy. A hoarse whisper suddenly broke the silence. She jerked her head up and saw his eyelashes fluttering as his eyes opened. Those eyes that had once been filled with indifference and calculation now held only a murky pain and a stubbornness she couldn't comprehend. "You're awake." Her voice was hoarse as she reached for the call button, only for him to seize her wrist. His grip was light, like a feather, yet it rendered her immobile. With great difficulty, he turned his eyes to look at her, his parched lips trembling, each word seeming to be gouged from his throat. "I gave my life back to you." Nancy turned her face away. "If you dare die, I'll..." Before she could finish, he interrupted her. He raised his other hand, his bandaged fingers clumsily trying to grasp hers. "I thought I loved her." His voice grew fainter, but his gaze remained locked onto her, as if trying to etch her into his soul. But the heartbeat doesn't lie. His fingertips brushed over the old scar on her wrist, the one left when he had unintentionally pushed her into the corner of a table while trying to save Natalie years ago. Nancy still wore a cold expression, but the corners of her eyes were tinged with a barely noticeable red. She stared at the burned scars on his back, left when he rushed into the fire years ago to save her. Back then, she thought it was fake, just part of his act to calm her. But now, the scars peeked through the white bandages like a searing brand, making her heart twist in pain. Memories suddenly surged uncontrollably. He bought an entire street of ginkgo trees, drove out at 3 a.m. to get fermented rice dumplings, held her through menstrual cramps all night. The details she had dismissed as acting now carried a scorching warmth, gradually melting her frozen heart. If everything was for the child's sake, how could these tender gestures, which went beyond mere acting, be explained? "Hayden," she choked out his name, her trembling fingertips brushing against his fever-flushed, swollen cheek. He seemed to hear her, blinking weakly, his lips moving slightly but unable to produce any sound. The monitoring device suddenly emitted a piercing alarm, and his hand abruptly went limp, dropping down. The Buddhist prayer beads around his neck suddenly snapped with a sharp crack, scattering one by one, rolling onto his chest and onto the back of her tear-stained hand. From one of the cracked beads, a small piece of paper fell out, trembling. She picked it up and unfolded it. It was his handwriting, hurried yet forceful, with a single line written, "Natalie's illness is fake. I know, but I didn't dare tell you. Afraid you'd realize I've been deceiving you all along. Afraid you wouldn't even want this false affection anymore." On the back of the paper, there was another line of even fainter writing, as if written with the last ounce of strength. "Nancy, I'm sorry." Nancy clutched the piece of paper, looking at the deathly pale, barely breathing Hayden, and finally let out a deep sigh. Fearing that the news might leak, Hayden was quickly taken to a private hospital by his assistant for recovery, and everything returned to how it was at the beginning. Nancy, on the other hand, let out a sigh of relief. She knew she couldn't be completely heartless, and the best way was to avoid meeting. But little did she expect that when she went to the temple's backyard to fetch incense and candles, someone who had been hiding in the shadows suddenly rushed out and knocked her unconscious. When she woke up again, Nancy found herself tied to a cold metal chair, her mouth tightly sealed with tape, forced to watch helplessly as Natalie paced back and forth in front of her. The woman was dressed in a gorgeous gown, but her makeup was twisted with madness. Wielding a fruit knife in her hand, its tip carving dangerous arcs through the air. "Hayden is mine. Mom and Dad are mine too." How dare you take everything that belongs to me? Natalie suddenly stopped in front of her. The knife's tip almost touching the tip of her nose. Nancy looked at her with hollow eyes. She never expected Natalie to go this far. The phone fell on the roadside during the struggle, and now perhaps only Hayden could find her. If he was still willing to come for the child, do you think hiding in a temple will bring you liberation? Natalie laughed, her voice shrill. I tell you, it's impossible. As long as you live for even a day, Hayden will always have a place for you in his heart. She suddenly grabbed Nancy's hair, forcing her to look up, and snarled threateningly, we were so close to being together forever. The incident in the garden back then could have been hidden for a lifetime. Why did you have to ruin everything? Nancy's pupils suddenly contracted. Memories in her mind suddenly became clear. She was indeed practicing piano in the garden. Natalie was dancing in an identical dress not far away. So Hayden's love at first sight was actually Natalie's scheme from the very beginning. What does it matter now that he knows the truth? Natalie slowly lowered the knife, pausing at her swollen abdomen, her eyes filled with venom. He'd give his life for you. But what about me? I've pretended to be sick for 3 years, playing this charade with him. Why should I be the one to lose in the end? The moment the blade was about to descend, the rusted factory door was violently flung open with a bang. Hayden rushed in, his suit covered in dust, blood trickling from his temple. Yet, the instant he saw Nancy, his eyes turned red. He didn't even glance at Natalie, charging straight for the metal chair and reaching to tear the tape from her mouth. Get away, Natalie shrieked, raising the knife to stab at his back. Hayden seemed unaware, focused only on untying the ropes. It wasn't until the searing pain of the knife piercing his flesh hit him that he shuddered violently, yet instinctively turned to shield Nancy behind him. Warm blood dripped onto the back of her hand, scalding her into frozen stillness. Hayden, she cried out involuntarily. Hayden clutched his wound, staring at Natalie with eyes as cold as ice. Let her go. I won't. Natalie screamed hysterically. You met me first, at the Elton family's banquet, when I pushed her into the pool. You saw me first, is that so? Hayden sneered, blood seeping through his fingers, yet his tone carried unprecedented scorn. But the only eyes I've ever loved are hers when she looks at me. He remembered the first time by the pool. Nancy, drenched yet stubbornly refusing to cry, the brokenness and resilience in her eyes had been like a key, instantly unlocking his frozen heart. As for Natalie's smug smile at the time, in his eyes, it was nothing more than a clown's antics. Natalie was thunderstruck, her face turning deathly pale. You're lying, you clearly, whether I'm lying or not, you know the truth in your heart. Hayden interrupted her, his body swaying slightly from blood loss, yet he still stood protectively in front of Nancy. From the moment you had our parents set the house on fire, from when you tried to burn her alive in the hospital, from when you sent her to prison, every single thing you've done has made me sick. Nancy felt as if something had struck her heart violently upon hearing his words. So he had known everything all along. Those truths she thought were concealed from him had long been clear in his mind. Just as Natalie stood frozen in shock, Nancy suddenly broke free from Hayden's loosely tied ropes. When he had rushed in earlier, he had deliberately only torn half the tape and secretly cut the ropes binding her wrists. She swiftly snatched Natalie's knife and pressed it against her throat. The blade was icy cold, pressed against Natalie's violently heaving neck. Nancy stared into her terrified eyes, recalling everything that had been taken from her since childhood, the beatings in prison, the despair in the fire, and boundless hatred surged instantly in her gaze. You stole my life, ruined my child. Her voice trembled with hatred. I won't let you go, Nancy, Hayden called weakly, reaching out to touch her shoulder but staggering from excessive blood loss. Nancy froze mid-motion. She turned to look at him, taking in his pale face and worried eyes, then lowered her gaze to Natalie's face contorted with fear. Hatred surged like a tidal wave, threatening to consume her, but in the end, she abruptly released her grip and threw the dagger to the ground with a sharp clang. Filthy hands. Her voice was hollow, devoid of any emotion. Natalie collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Hayden let out a sigh of relief. But just as he was about to step forward, his vision went black, and he fell straight down. Nancy cried out as she caught him, her hands meeting warm, sticky blood. Staring at the shocking amount of blood in her palm, she felt as if breathing had become difficult. Her hands trembling, she took out Hayden's phone from his pocket and dialed the police and ambulance. The wail of sirens grew louder, illuminating the dilapidation of the abandoned factory. Nancy held the unconscious Hayden in her arms, watching as the police led away Natalie, who was still screaming, I won't accept this. Though she could no longer hear it, the wind swept through the empty factory, stirring up dust from the ground. The doctors quickly brought over a stretcher, urgently stopped the bleeding for Hayden, and placed an oxygen mask on him. The life monitoring equipment in the ambulance kept beeping incessantly, while his heart rate and blood oxygen levels continued to plummet rapidly. Nancy followed them into the vehicle. She looked down at Hayden's pale face, sighed silently, and gently brushed her fingertips over his tightly closed eyes. After the kidnapping incident, Hayden spent half a month recovering from his injuries before barely being discharged from the hospital. Although Natalie had already been locked up, he still couldn't rest easy and specifically hired bodyguards to keep watch around the temple. The relationship between the two seemed to have eased somewhat. After a light, misty rain, Nancy decided to sweep up the fallen leaves in the yard. As soon as she stepped out of the courtyard gate, she was stunned by the sight before her. The entire hillside was planted with ginkgo trees, their trunks tied with pale golden ribbons. As if someone had stolen autumn's glow and brought it to the late summer, Hayden stood at the top of the stone steps, his suit cuffs stained with fresh mud, clutching a velvet box in his hand. Behind him, monks were filling the tree pits with soil, each tree's roots lined with warm yellow light strips, clear evidence of a night's rushed work. Nancy, his voice was hoarse, as if scraped by sandpaper, and as he took a step forward, his knee trembled slightly from an old injury. After being discharged, I had someone transplant all the ginkgo trees from that street in the southern part of the city. You once said you loved seeing fallen leaves cover the stone steps. Morning mist drifted through the treetops. Nancy gazed at the frost in his hair, remembering how 3 years ago he had carried her through the smoke of a fire, his brows dusted with ashes yet smiling tenderly. But now, her fingertips only felt the old scar from the induced abortion beneath his monk's robe. Cold as a serpent, Hayden knelt on one knee, the opened velvet box revealing a ginkgo leaf-shaped ring, its inner band engraved with a tiny character for sleep. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and fell on the back of his hand, where a fresh burn scar marked his skin, a remnant from the last time he saved her. Give me one more chance, he pleaded, looking up at her, his pupils reflecting the vibrant green of the mountains. I've donated all the Hamilton family's shares. Hamilton Natalie has been sentenced, and no one can hurt you ever again. The mountain wind lifted her monk's robes as Nancy bent down to pick up a ginkgo leaf at her feet. Her fingers tracing the veins of the leaf. Mr. Hayden, she began, her voice as light as morning mist. Look at this tree. Transplanting always damages the roots. Before the words had fully left her lips, she suddenly raised her hand and hurled the ring fiercely into the valley. The sound of metal slicing through the air startled a few birds into flight. Hayden's pupils constricted abruptly. His body swayed slightly, yet he made no move to chase after it. Nancy's fingertip gently traced the burned scar on his chest, where the skin burned hotter than the rest, as if concealing embers that refused to die out. Since childhood, I've been the overlooked and ignored one, until you appeared. I thought it was salvation. Her fingertip circled the scar's outline. Only later did I realize I'd merely fallen into a deeper abyss. Hayden suddenly gripped her wrist, the heat from his palm searing her skin with pain. It wasn't like that. His voice carried a broken hoarseness. I was wrong, from the moment I mistook someone else for you in the garden 7 years ago. I kept making mistake after mistake. He suddenly remembered something and tremblingly pulled out a diary from his suit's inner pocket. The edges of the pages were worn fuzzy, and inside was pressed a dried ginkgo leaf, the very one that had fallen from her hair that year, when you were hospitalized. I went to the mountains. He flipped to a certain page filled with fountain pen writings of I'm sorry. The ink pressed so deep it nearly tore through the paper. Many children there had no names. I named them Nyin, thinking. Nancy's gaze fell on the last page of the diary. A candid photo of her copying scriptures in the temple, sunlight casting a faint pink crescent on the scar at her wrist. Beneath the photo was a line of small text. She likes lilies but fears pollen allergies. She drinks ginger-infused brown sugar water during her period. When she plays the violin, she prefers to stand with her back to the light. So he remembered it all, every detail she had dismissed as acting, he had quietly stored in his heart. Suddenly, the laughter of children came from the foot of the mountain, as several little girls with pigtails ran up the hillside, holding wild chrysanthemums in their hands. Hayden, they gathered around Hayden, lifting their rosy little faces. We're bringing flowers for Master Wolai. One of the little girls in a blue dress wore a ginkgo leaf pendant around her neck, identical to the ring Hayden had used to propose. Nancy noticed the red string tied around her wrist, from which hung a peace knot, something she had left behind in prison, later retrieved by Hayden and given to the children in the mountains. Master Wolai, the little girl tucked the wild chrysanthemums into her hand, her eyes curving into crescents as she smiled. Hayden said you're the fairy sent by the Bodhisattva. Nancy looked down at the bouquet, her nose suddenly tingling with emotion. Hayden slowly stood up, the old injury in his knee nearly making him stumble, but Nancy instinctively caught him. The moment their eyes met, he saw glistening tears in hers. Just like the dewdrops that had gathered on her eyelashes 7 years ago when she stood under the ginkgo tree playing her violin on that rainy night. I know you still hate me, he whispered, his fingertips brushing lightly against her cheek. It's okay, I can wait. Until you're willing to look at me again. Until these ginkgo trees truly cover the stone steps. The morning mist gradually dissipated, and the ginkgo leaves covering the mountains shimmered with golden light under the sun. Nancy watched Hayden as he turned and walked away. He moved slowly, each step as if treading on knife blades, yet he never looked back. She lowered her head to look at the wild chrysanthemum in her palm and suddenly remembered the words of Abbess Jinxie. Obsession is like the ginkgo tree, sprouting in spring and falling in autumn, seemingly cyclical, yet each leaf is etched with a different story. A mountain breeze blew past, and a newly sprouted ginkgo leaf landed on her shoulder. Like someone softly sighing, Nancy raised her head, gazing in the direction where Hayden had disappeared, her fingers slowly curling as she clutched the leaf. In the visitation room of the women's prison, the smell of disinfectant mingled with mildew. Natalie sat behind the iron bars in her prison uniform, her once meticulously cared for long hair now dry and tangled like weeds, a lingering red bruise still visible on her cheek. A mark left by being struck with a toothbrush handle by a fellow inmate the day before. Sister, her fingers gripping the bars turned white, her voice trembling like a leaf in the autumn wind. I know I was wrong. Can you put in a good word for me? Ask the guards to stop targeting me. Nancy watched her through the glass, her expression cold and indifferent the entire time. The sycamore leaves outside the window rustled in the wind, reminding her of how Natalie used to be as a child. Snatching her paintbrush, then crying and throwing a tantrum to their parents, always shifting the blame onto her in the end. Do you know how it felt when those people poured boiling water on my bed? Natalie suddenly pulled up her pant leg, revealing the burned scars on her calf. Do you know how much it hurt? I told the guards, and they said I deserved it. Sunlight streamed through the barred window, casting its glow on Natalie's face, illuminating the fear in her eyes. Nancy watched her frenzied state and suddenly recalled the night she was pushed into a mixed-gender prison cell. A man with a brutal face sneered as he approached, and she had similarly curled up in a corner, her nails leaving bloody scratches on his face. I wrote a confession letter. Natalie hurriedly pulled out a few crumpled sheets of paper from under her pillow, covered in pencil written I'm sorry in shaky, uneven handwriting. Look, I really know I was wrong, if you just forgive me. Once I'm out, I promise. Natalie, Nancy finally spoke, her voice as calm as an ancient well. During those 3 years you faked illness, using my child's marrow for treatment, and when you finally sent me to prison, did you ever consider the word forgiveness? Natalie's voice abruptly cut off, her lips trembling as tears finally fell. I was just so afraid of losing Hayden, she sobbed. Our parents always told me since childhood that you were the extra one. That only I could receive all the love, so you treated others' lives like toys to snatch. Nancy stood up, the hem of her monastic robe brushing against the chair with a soft rustle. Save your repentance for those you've actually harmed. As she turned to leave, she heard Natalie screaming behind her. Nancy, you'll regret this. One day you'll be as lonely as I am. The moment the visitation room door closed, Nancy saw her reflection in the glass, dressed in gray monastic robes. Her features gaunt, her eyes devoid of either hatred or love, only a deathly stillness like stagnant water. 3 days later, Mrs. Hamilton knelt before the mountain gate of the Pure Heart Nunnery, her white hair soaked by rain and clinging to her pale face. In her arms she cradled a thermal container holding the brown sugar glutinous rice porridge, the only food Nancy had loved as a child. Nancy, your father, he's had a stroke. Mrs. Hamilton grabbed her wrist, trembling with sobs. The doctor said he needs rehabilitation as soon as possible, but all our money has been frozen by Hayden. Nancy looked down at the blue stone slab beneath her knees, where the bloodstains from Hayden's last kneeling still remained. Her memory suddenly flashed back to that night when she had a 40-degree fever, shivering under the blankets, listening to her parents telling stories to Natalie in the next room, their voices dripping with tenderness. When I had a 40-degree fever and had to endure it alone, her voice was as light as raindrops. Where were you? Mrs. Hamilton suddenly looked up, her face full of shock. Weren't you fine back then? Natalie said you just didn't want to go to school. Yes, she's always like that. Nancy crouched down, her fingertips brushing the edge of the thermos, where the warmth of her mother's palm still lingered. just like when she said I pushed her down the stairs, that I set the house on fire. That I beat people in prison, you always believe her. Rainwater streamed down Mrs. Hamilton's cheeks, mingling with her tears. I was wrong, I was truly wrong. She grabbed Nancy's hand, those same hands that had slapped her countless times. Now as dry and gnarled as old tree bark. Your father is bedridden now, can't even speak, and every day he just cries looking at your photo. Nancy withdrew her hand and pulled out a yellowed photo from her sleeve pocket. It was her 10th birthday. The only family photo they ever took together. In the picture, her parents were hugging Natalie with bright smiles, while she stood in the corner, clutching a piece of crushed cake in her hand. This photo, she placed it in Mrs. Hamilton's palm. I fished it out of the trash. Mrs. Hamilton looked at the photo and suddenly burst into loud sobs, her forehead hitting the stone pavement hard. It's my fault. I was blind. Please, for the sake of him being your father, save him. The mountain wind blew, lifting Nancy's monastic robe. She remembered the shattered glass covering the ancestral hall floor, the cold indifference in her parents' eyes when they pushed her out to take the blame for Natalie, and that bowl of spoiled rice in prison. I can't save him. She stood up, rainwater dripping from the brim of her hat. Just like back then, when you couldn't save me from my high fever. With that, she turned and walked into the nunnery, shutting Mrs. Hamilton's cries in the rain outside the door. The candle flames in the Buddhist hall flickered, and Abbess Jinxie was wiping the statue of Buddha. Seeing her enter, she said softly, "Benefactor, the porridge outside the door is still warm." Nancy walked to the prayer mat and knelt down, her fingertips brushing over the golden characters on the Buddhist scripture. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall, tapping against the ginkgo leaves like someone sighing in a low voice. She remembered Natalie writing about loneliness in her prison letter, remembered her father's clouded eyes after his stroke, and suddenly felt a tightness in her chest. Perhaps the true punishment is not revenge, but letting them forever live with the consequences they have sown. Just like Natalie being beaten in prison, just like parents guarding their paralyzed father with lifelong regret, and she, Nancy, looked down at the prayer beads in her palm, engraved with the words peace of mind. Rainwater seeped through the window lattice and fell on the back of her hand, icy and piercing, yet it gradually calmed her chaotic heart. The prison visitation room never sees sunlight throughout the year, the air thick with a mix of disinfectant and the musty smell of mildew. Natalie wore a faded prison uniform, her brittle hair tied back, the once arrogant and glamorous appearance now hollowed out by life behind bars. She rubbed her frostbitten, purple fingers, her eyes burning with near-delusional anticipation. Hayden had come. He had finally agreed to see her. The heavy iron door clanged open. Hayden appeared at the entrance in a finely tailored black suit, starkly out of place in the squalid surroundings. He was followed by two expressionless prison guards, the chill emanating from him seeming to lower the temperature of the entire room by several degrees. Natalie suddenly stood up, her body trembling with excitement beneath the prison uniform. "Hayden, you came. I knew you wouldn't abandon me." She tried to rush forward but was sharply stopped by the guards. Hayden sat down on the metal chair opposite her, his gaze like a blade dipped in ice, coldly scraping across her face. There was none of his usual gentleness, only bone-chilling disgust. "Natalie," he began, his voice low and icy, each word like a stone thrown to the ground. "Did you think I came here to see you in this pitiful state?" Natalie's joyful expression froze, then quickly shifted to a pitiful, tearful tone. "Hayden, I really know I was wrong. I shouldn't have lied to you, shouldn't have hurt Nancy. I did all this because I love you too much. I can't live without you. Please help me. Get me out of here. I'll do anything you want if you just help me." She slumped over the cold metal table, tears and snot streaming down her face, desperately trying to sway him with their past bond. "Love me." Hayden let out a derisive snort, the mockery in his eyes nearly overflowing. "Your so-called love is pushing Nancy into hell, using her child as your bargaining chip for survival, watching her burn, get cut by glass, get sent to prison while you stand by gloating." He leaned forward, pressing against the iron bars, his eyes filled with undisguised hatred. "You think I don't know? From the very beginning, it was Nancy playing the violin in the garden. It was you who schemingly replaced her, you who kept playing innocent before me, making me misunderstand, making me." His voice faltered, carrying suppressed pain. "It made me lose sight of my own heart, hurting her without any bottom line. If it weren't for your meddling and constant scheming, how could Nancy and I have ended up like this?" Hayden's voice suddenly rose, filled with unquenchable rage. "It's you. You ruined everything." Natalie shrank back in fear at the ferocity in his eyes but still refused to give up. "It was Nancy who took everything that should have been mine. She's the one who—" "Shut up." Hayden slammed the table violently, the metal surface emitting a piercing noise. Even now you're still making excuses. Someone like you doesn't even deserve to mention the word love. He leaned back in his chair, straightened his cuffs, as if the earlier outburst had been an illusion, leaving behind only icy indifference. Didn't you want to leave? He curled his lips into a cruel smile. Then I'll make sure you stay here forever. Natalie's heart sank as a sense of foreboding enveloped her. Hayden glanced at the prison guard beside him, handing over an envelope, his voice calm yet carrying an undeniable command. This Miss Nancy has been rather restless in prison and refuses to obey discipline. He paused, his gaze sweeping over Natalie's terrified face. Give her special attention, make sure she reforms properly. The prison guard took the envelope, weighed it in his hand, and immediately understood. A fawning smile appeared on his face. Mr. Hayden, rest assured, we'll make sure she learns the rules. Hayden didn't look at Natalie again, standing up to leave. Hayden, you can't do this to me. I'm your sister. Natalie finally realized the terror. Frantically pounding on the iron bars, her voice shrill. Have you forgotten how good you used to be to me? You promised to protect me. Hayden didn't stop walking, only throwing a cold remark at the doorway like a knife plunging into Natalie's heart. The past. From the moment you hurt Nancy, the past died. The way you are now, you're not even fit to tie her shoes. The iron door slammed shut again with a heavy thud, cutting off the outside world and completely extinguishing Natalie's last shred of hope. The days that followed became Natalie's nightmare. Hayden's arrangement soon took effect. Once domineering and imperious, the Hamilton family's young miss had become an easy target for bullying in prison. The prison guards turned a blind eye to the petty torments inflicted upon her, even secretly encouraging them. The female inmates in her cell were already hostile toward the young miss who had entered wearing gold and silver. Now, with tacit approval from above, their cruelty intensified. Her food was stolen, she was pushed onto the cold floor at night, and any resistance was met with kicks and punches. Well, if it isn't that scheming bitch who faked illness to steal a man, look at her delicate skin, she must have lived a life of luxury before. Now it's our turn to serve you. They took away the few belongings she had, hurled filthy insults at her, and even splashed water on her, leaving her shivering in the bitter cold of winter. Natalie tried to resist, but it only brought her even harsher torment. Someone burned her arm with a cigarette butt, while others locked the door while she was showering, humiliating her amid the crowd's jeers. She cried and begged for mercy, calling out Hayden's name, but only coldness and mockery answered her. Once the pride held dearly in the palm of a hand, now shattered completely, day after day of torment left Natalie's mind gradually crumbling. She began talking to herself, speaking to the walls, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. Every day, disheveled and unkempt, arms scratched and scarred, eyes vacant, no longer holding the brilliance of the past. When Hayden once again passed by the prison records, what he saw was Natalie's latest entry, mentally unstable, requires solitary confinement. He merely glanced at it indifferently before tossing the file aside. Outside the window, the sunlight was just right, yet his thoughts drifted to that frail figure in the Qingshin nunnery. A sharp pang of pain piercing his heart. Revenge against Natalie brought him no joy, only emptiness, but he had no regrets, because this was the punishment she deserved. Yet none of this could bring back the Nancy who once devoted herself wholeheartedly to him. Meanwhile, in the prison on the other side, Natalie huddled in a corner, hugging her knees, completely out of her mind, still murmuring, "Hayden, save me." But what answered her was only the endless darkness and despair of the prison. Nancy folded the gray monastic robe neatly and placed it in the corner of the wooden table, the sandalwood prayer beads in her palms still warm from her body heat. Abbess Jinxie watched her, hesitating to speak. "Abbess, I wish to return to secular life," she said softly, yet with resolve. "With my heart unsettled, even the monk's robe cannot bring me peace." The prayer beads were pushed back onto the low table, a keepsake that had accompanied her through years of solitary devotion, now a shackle. Abbess Jinxie did not take them, only saying, "Attachment is a rope, and it is always oneself who is bound." She did not respond. Turning, she walked out of the meditation room. A plain cotton dress replaced the monastic robe, her long hair tied back, revealing the faint pink scar on her wrist, left from the induced abortion. Without looking back, she headed straight for the hospital. When the door of the intensive care unit was pushed open, Hayden lay on the hospital bed, wrapped in bandages. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and blood seeped through the gauze on his chest, the spot where he had taken the knife for her. His assistant stood nearby, whispering, "The doctor says his condition is unstable." She stepped closer, taking in his pale face and furrowed brows. Memories flooded back, him kneeling on one knee to put on her shoes, driving out at 3 a.m. to buy sweet rice balls, carrying her out of a fire, covered in blood. What she once thought were deceptive details now intertwined with the raw pain before her. Tightening her chest, "Hayden," she called softly, her fingertips hovering above his cheek before finally settling on the velvet box beside his pillow. Inside was a ginkgo leaf necklace. The pendant engraved with the character Mion on its inner side. Back then, he proposed to her outside the temple with utmost solemnity, his eyes brimming with love as he said, "Ginkgo leaves are like butterflies, but you look even more beautiful wearing them." She took out the necklace and placed it by his pillow. The metal pendant lay against the white sheets, like a frozen fallen leaf. His eyelashes fluttered faintly in his unconscious state, as if trying to say something, but only a weak, breathy sound escaped. "Here's your necklace back," she murmured, as if speaking to herself. Those cherished days, the orchestrated pain, the despair in the fire, the coldness of the prison, and his resolute act of taking the knife for her. Now they all twisted into a knot, stuck in her throat. She couldn't sort them out, nor did she want to anymore. As she turned to leave, her assistant called out, "Ms. Nancy, Mr. Hayden, take good care of him." She didn't look back as she pushed open the door to the intensive care unit. The corridor lights cast a pale glow, illuminating her slender shadow. She once thought the temple was her final destination, but later realized that with a restless heart, everywhere feels like a besieged city. Now she just wants to leave, to go somewhere without ginkgo trees, without Hayden, and without the Hamiltons. At the airport check-in counter, she handed over her passport. The destination was an unfamiliar city, and the date on the ticket was for that same day. Before turning off her phone, she took one last look at the news. Natalie was sentenced to prison on multiple charges, and the Hamiltons were completely bankrupt, and Hayden's name never appeared again. The glaring lights at the security checkpoint stung her eyes. She removed the last tangible connection to her past from her wrist. The jade bracelet he had given her, which she had already taken off at the temple, now lay in her carry-on bag. After passing through security, she walked straight to the boarding gate without looking back. As the plane took off, City H shrank into a speck of light beneath the window. She closed her eyes, and the last thing that flashed through her mind was Hayden's eyes. Suddenly reddened as he shielded her from the knife, the pain in her chest flared up again, but she knew it would fade as the plane ascended into the sky. A ginkgo leaf necklace lay beside Hayden's pillow, its pendant gleaming coldly under the ICU lights. His fingers twitched unconsciously, as if trying to grasp something, but in the end, all he held was emptiness, and the one who was once cradled in his palm is now thousands of miles away, beginning a life without him. On a Parisian autumn afternoon, sunlight filters through the stained glass of misty tea house, casting dappled shadows on the wooden tea table. Nancy is brewing a pot of aged pu'er for a guest. The sound of the tea needle breaking the cake crisp like a pebble dropping into a mountain stream. 5 years have passed. Her fingertips no longer tremble with the hesitation of those days, and in the rise and fall of her wrist as she pours tea, there is a settled composure. "Mrs. Nancy, your tea house is truly an oasis of tranquility amidst the bustle," the elderly French lady across from her praised in halting Chinese, "unlike my daughter who always frequents those noisy cafes." Nancy smiled faintly as she poured the tea into the fairness cup. "Madame Mesley, tea should be enjoyed in stillness, only then can the heart hear its flavor." The tea house was filled with the mingled scents of sandalwood and tea leaves. On the wall hung the two characters' 4 tranquil heart she had brushed herself, the strokes now devoid of their former sharpness, leaving only the serene softness of ink wash. Outside the window, the plane tree leaves had just begun to show autumn's touch when a sudden gust of wind swept through the street, sending a few golden leaves swirling through the open shop door. Nancy paused as she handed over the tea and snacks. Those weren't plain tree leaves, but ginkgo. "The wind is really strong today." The old lady adjusted her shawl. Nancy didn't respond, her gaze following those few ginkgo leaves. They swirled in the air before landing on the bluestone slabs at the entrance, looking just like the ginkgo-lined street Hayden had bought 7 years ago. She thought she had long sealed those memories deep within time, yet now they were effortlessly stirred by a single leaf. A faint, dull ache pulsed from some corner of her heart, like an old forgotten wound itching on a rainy day. "Miss, another pot of jasmine tea, please." A guest at the neighboring table called out. "Of course, just a moment," she replied, withdrawing her gaze as she turned toward the tea shelf. The moment my fingertips touched the jasmine tea canister, a fiercer gust of wind suddenly swept through outside, swirling golden ginkgo leaves into the air like a sudden golden downpour. The tea canister clattered to the ground, scattering the leaves. Nancy jerked her head up, the wind ceased. And a few ginkgo leaves came to rest on the shoulders of the man standing at the shop's entrance. He wore a dark gray trench coat, his tall and straight figure standing in the autumn sunlight, the silhouette so familiar it made her breath catch. 5 years seemed to have only carved a more composed aura into him. His brow remained sharp, but his gaze was no longer the cold or obsessive one from back then. Instead, it held a depth she couldn't decipher. Hayden. That name had been sealed away in her heart for 5 years, yet now, amid the swirling ginkgo leaves, it exploded with deafening clarity. Their eyes met. His footsteps paused at the doorway, a freshly caught ginkgo leaf still clasped in his hand. The leaf trembled lightly between his fingertips, like a butterfly about to take flight. His gaze pierced through the steaming heat and floating dust of the tea house, locking onto her as if these 5 years had been nothing but an illusion. Nancy could hear her own heartbeat, pounding against her eardrums like war drums. She instinctively took half a step back, bumping into the tea shelf behind her. The images she had deliberately forgotten, the thick smoke of the fire, the shattered glass in the ancestral hall, the iron bars of the prison, the blood gushing when he blocked the knife, surged up instantly, overlapping with the figure of the man before her. Mrs. Nancy, Mrs. Maisley looked at her pale face in confusion. Hayden moved. He stepped through the shop door, the hem of his trench coat stirring a faint chill in the air, carrying the bittersweet scent of ginkgo leaves. He walked up to her, stopping 3 steps away, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Nancy, he began, his voice deeper than she remembered, with a barely perceptible rasp. I've been looking for you for 5 years. The customers in the shop fell silent, watching with curiosity the sudden appearance of this Eastern man and the unyielding determination evident in his eyes. Nancy clenched the hand hidden behind her back, her nails digging into her palm. The pain kept her awake. She noticed the new fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint silver strands at his temples, and the ginkgo leaf in his hand, identical to the pendant on the necklace she had returned to him years ago. Sir, you've mistaken me for someone else. She lowered her eyes, forcing her voice to remain calm. This is a tea house, and we don't entertain anyone other than customers. Hayden S. Adams' apple bobbed as pain flickered in his eyes. I wasn't mistaken. Even now, you still refuse to reconcile with me. He took half a step forward, cautiously extending his hand as if to touch her cheek, but paused midway, then placed the ginkgo leaf on the tea table beside them. I searched all over Paris for 3 months, asking at every tea house, 5 years ago. He woke up in the intensive care unit with only that cold ginkgo leaf necklace by his pillow. The assistant said she went to the airport and then vanished without a trace. He cancelled all his work, even neglecting the important matters at the company. He searched for her like a madman, traveling across more than a dozen countries, until he saw the name Misty Tea House in a blurry profile in a magazine introducing Chinese tea houses in Paris. Mr. Hayden. Nancy looked up, her eyes deliberately distant. What's past is past. She saw the hurt in his eyes, and somewhere in her heart ached in response, but she couldn't turn back. The past of hurting and being hurt, like tangled vines, had long suffocated her. It was only with great difficulty that she had found a semblance of peace in a foreign land. The past is gone. Hayden's voice carried a hint of urgency. Nancy, I know I was wrong back then, terribly wrong. I made Natalie pay, made the Hamiltons suffer. But I know, none of it can undo. He paused, his voice strained. None of it can undo the harm I caused you. The wind rose again, rustling the ginkgo leaves outside the door. Nancy gazed at the leaf on the tea table, its veins illuminated clearly by the sunlight filtering through. She remembered the twinkling lights of City H seen from the plane taking off at the airport 5 years ago, recalled the days and nights spent running this tea house alone in a foreign land, and thought of every midnight when nightmares startled her awake, with only the silent flow of the Seine outside her window for company. I'm doing well now, she said softly, her tone carrying a settled calmness. This tea house, these guests, this life, I'm truly content. Hayden looked at her, at the detached calm in her eyes, a serenity that belonged to another life, one he had never seen in her before. He had once believed that finding her would be enough to make amends, to start anew. But now he understood that some fractures could never be entirely smoothed over by time. I know, he nodded, his eyes carrying both disappointment and a hint of relief. I was just passing by, wanted to make sure you're doing okay. He paused, then took a small box from his coat pocket and placed it beside the ginkgo leaf. This, I've always meant to return it to you. The box opened, revealing the very string of agarwood prayer beads she had returned to Abbess Jinxie. Yet somehow they had found their way into his hands. The beads remained smooth and warm, with the character's tranquility clearly visible. Nancy looked at the prayer beads, then at the exhaustion and determination in his eyes, and suddenly felt the pent-up frustration of 5 years slowly dissipate from her chest. She didn't take them, merely saying, "Mr. Hayden, the tea house is closing." Hayden gazed at her deeply, his eyes filled with a multitude of complex emotions: apology, longing, regret, and ultimately, letting go. He withdrew his hand, placed the prayer beads back into the box, and gently pushed it toward her. "I apologize for the disturbance, Mrs. Nancy." He turned and walked toward the door. The silhouette of his trench coat stretched long in the afternoon sunlight, the ginkgo leaf on his shoulder having long since drifted away unnoticed. Nancy stood still, watching his figure disappear around the street corner until it was completely out of sight. The tea house regained its quiet, and Mrs. Maisley gently asked, "He is an old friend I haven't seen in a long time." Nancy bent down to pick up the tea canister from the floor, her tone now calm again. She walked to the door, intending to close it, but noticed a few golden ginkgo leaves scattered on the bluestone slabs outside, trembling slightly in the autumn breeze. She reached out her hand and caught one. The edge of the leaf was slightly worn, much like those memories polished by time. The tea inside was still steaming, while outside the window, Paris remained bustling with traffic. Nancy looked at the ginkgo leaf in her palm and suddenly smiled faintly. Perhaps the past was never truly forgotten, but there was no need to deliberately recall it anymore. She turned around, closed the shop door, and left that leaf outside, in the tea house. The box of agarwood prayer beads lay quietly on the tea table, with sunlight filtering through the glass, casting a soft glow on the beads. Meanwhile, Nancy had already picked up the tea scoop again, pouring hot tea for the next guest. As if that sudden reunion just now was merely a fleeting breeze on an autumn afternoon.